Hello everyone, Ron again, and in this video we're going to talk about setting up an FL Studio project. So check this out. There are several ways to think about it, and here's usually what I think about when I am setting up projects now. So you've got the mixer track, you got the channel rack, you got the playlist. So we're going to start by talking about the playlist first. So obviously on the channel rack here, it shows whatever plugins you've instantiated, and you will notice that usually when you go all the way over, or if you click this plus, you have the option to pick whatever plugins, and these are called generators, that you want to add to the project. And generators are the things that are going to generate sound, and they're going to produce the sounds that you put into the song you make. So let's look at Citrus. Now you insert it, it opens up right here. It shows you the number of wherever it's going to go on the mixer tracks. So you can see that my voice is channel 2. You can see that channel 1 is already occupied by that instance of contact that has 25 in it. But if we click here, we should start thinking about organization when you set up a project from the beginning of it. So notice that this one is already on track 1, but when I loaded this one, it loaded onto the master bus, and you can tell this by the fact that it has no number next to it. But you don't want that, because you want everything to be separated so you can affect sounds individually. So what I can do is I can go to assign to new instrument track. I can highlight it right here, and I can hold Control and press L, and that assigns it to a free track. But it's better to assign it to an instrument track for this reason. If you look at the playlist, you see the instance of contact is already here. So it will be affected everywhere where you make a change. So if I change the color, it's going to change it here, and it's going to change it here, and it's going to change it here. So that's the benefit of that. Whereas if I look at Citrus and I change the color of Citrus, make it blue, that change is not reflected in the mixer channel, and it doesn't exist in the playlist yet. So if I assign this to a new instrument track, notice that it changes to blue, and it's added to the playlist, so that if I make a pattern, and let's say I copy, change the name of the pattern, misclick, change the name of the pattern, make it Citrus, and then I insert it. Now this is the Citrus pattern. So that's useful for subdividing the different elements of your arrangement, including audio tracks, because you could go here and you have routing, there's track mode, it's unassigned, but you can make it an audio track or an instrument track. And that's extremely useful. Now, the better way to do this would be the normal way that I would, in that, let's see. Okay, well, there's a malfunction, but ordinarily it will open up over here, and you will have the plugin picker that is to the left. And so you could choose whatever plugin you wanted, sort of like this, and you could drag them and drop them right here. But for some reason it's not coming up right now. Maybe there's a bug. Anyhow, let's continue onward. So I will do this way. And let's say we use one of my favorite synthesizers, which is mini synth. I feel like it's overlooked, but I like it. If I hold down Alt and press C, this will copy it. So you'll see mini synth number 2. Now let's say that I have 4 instances of mini synth, and I assign each of them to a track like this. Now at some point, let's pretend that Citrus is doing something different. So you want to assign them in terms of the type of instrument that it is, right? Let's say that Citrus is going to be a bell sound, and you want all of those sounds to be alike. Let's pretend that Contact has a drum sound in it, or it's a drum set. And that these mini synths are each going to be orchestral. So we'll put viola, violin, cello, and bass. Now, you're organizing your project, and you have to start thinking about what you're going to do at the end during the beginning. So now all of these things they're here, and they all match in this way. But let's say if I didn't copy it, maybe this one might have loaded and it could be a different color. Usually it would be black if it's set to default. And let's say this one is some color like green. And then you look at this, and it's hard to tell what is what, because everything is not color coded the way it should be. So if you go here, the advantage of having instrument tracks and or audio tracks is that you can group them. When you right click and press G on the keyboard, it's going to group it with the track above. So you continue doing that, and I think of this as choosing one as a leader. If you hold down Shift and scroll, these will now move up and down as a group, and so will whatever patterns are in them. So now let's say the drums are going to be pink. This bell sound, let's say if I had chimes or whatever, and I have like a bell section, maybe mallets, those are going to be independent. In fact, I could actually make it one. So let's look at one of the presets that I have created. And in this video, I'm not going to play the sounds because I did not actually normalize this project to not clip on YouTube, and I don't want it to be too loud. But just for the sake of argument, we've now actually got a bell sound. You see how it changed to black? Perhaps I don't want it to be black. But if I group them, I'll show you. So we go here, auto color the group, and they all change to be the same color. Maybe I don't like this color. So middle click, right? That's when you press down on the scroll wheel on the mouse. Go here, decide what color you want. Let's say this blue. Auto color the group. And now, when I go to the mixer track, they're all the same color. Now, I'm going to add a few more and pretend that we have a project that I'm really going to create. And maybe I will make something out of this. You never know. But for just right now, add an instance of Flex. Go down to favorites and Celeste. That's one of my favorites. It's really a bell sound. Assign it to a new track. You see it appears here and it appears here. Now scroll it up. Right click, press G, they're grouped together. But what if I want this to be a different color, right? And I want it to be red. So I want to color these. And we'll say for the sake of argument that the drums are all inside of one contact instance because that is possible. You can see I can uninstantiate, if that's a word. I can uninstantiate the example of 25 that I have. And I can add a full drum set like 90s drummer or 60s, 50s drummer. You see, it plays everything. So the different keys represent different parts of the drum set. And you can route these so that each drum will go out to a different mixer track, and that is beneficial. So then we will have something like this is a contact instance, but it'll do this track +1, +2, +3, +4, and so on, and it will route the instruments to different tracks. So the way I would handle this is to move this over. And remember, we're thinking about organization. So right click, separate it. And now look here, you have track 1, which is my voice. 2, which is a bell sound. 3 through 6 are the orchestral proxies. And this is another bell sound. Then you have drums. So it would make no sense and be confusing if this first one was in front of these. And you have a kick drum that's in channel 2, and then it's +1, so the snare drum is here, because then the bell and the snare would be playing through the same thing and they will have the same processing. So this is the importance of this, routing tracks to a specific destination where they would work. So now you want to sort these things into groups. When they're color coded, if they were all the same color, you will look on these and you wouldn't know which was which, or it would be harder to tell. But when you assign them to instrument tracks like this, they share the name, because you can see I didn't change this to Lovely Bell. I changed the preset when I opened Citrus, and it changed the name here. And so did Flex, because it instantiates as Flex. Right, so check this out. Let's say I open another example of Flex and I go to like Essential Guitars, and I choose this one here or that one because they both sound good. Notice it was Flex first, and now it's Ace Nylon. Assign it to a new track, changes the name of the track, changes it here too. Now everything is organized, and let's say, just for the sake of example, I'm going to put it in this, and it turns red because of auto color group. It's to be noted that it doesn't always do that. Sometimes it gets weird and finicky, but today it's behaving. So it changed the color, and now I don't have to seek to figure out where this is actually at. Now keep in mind that when you do this, it's going to put it on the next available slot. So that's why my voice has not been overtaken, because there are plugins on it. But if there were not, then it would start on track 1. So what I would do is possibly I would move the drum section really far away, because it would look something like this, right? You're going to have maybe 6 or 7 instruments total in any instance of like drums. So I will have them just named whatever they're named, and they will be named automatically, but sequestered as a group like this. And this will be that section. So you separate it from the others because you don't want to confuse yourself. Now you want to be looking, say if I have a bell section when I'm writing something, right? There's bells, and when I look on this playlist, they're all together. My eye knows to look for red, that's a section. I look for blue, that's a section. I look for drums, they're all together. Even if there's only one pattern, I know that they're going to be divided here because of the way I route them in contact, which is an advanced concept, more so than this. So what I'm going to do is organize this. And actually, if I was doing it, I feel like I would put the bells in front because that's just cool. And then I'm going to go here. You're going to notice these are all out of order the same way. And I'm going to go sort by track number. You could also do it by color, but I usually do it by track number because that's what I like. So now everything is in line, and I can look here. I say this is the first one. When I go here, it's going to be the first one. It's the same for this. Celeste is the second one. When I go here, it's going to be the second one. And there's little things like this that cause you to save time because you're not searching around to the point that you forget what you were about to do. Now the next thing is this. If I highlight these, I can affect them all at the same time. So let's use my voice as the first example of what I'm about to say. Because what I have is routing, color, docking. Right now, if you right click on any mixer track, there's a bunch of options. And if you go down, it says dock to left, middle, or right. So that controls the orientation of the track. When you think of like right, mid spacing and like left spacing in a Word document, for example. So if I click right, it'll just stay on the right side and it won't be mixed with these. And then it's sort of like its own thing. It's separated. So it doesn't cause you to look at it and even consider that it's one of these. Now, literally, this one's the first track that's over there. And it's the first track here. This is not something that if I'm writing music that I had to consider that the audio might be in one of these places. And it streamlines the work process. So now we're going to look at the next thing when you consider buses, because this plays into that same idea. What I normally do is go here, pick some number of tracks that are directly at the end, and dock them all to the right. And what color they are and what their names are, it depends on what I'm going to use them for. So I'll take these, highlight all of them, go over to this little arrow, and this is the arrow where you have the option to route to this track. If you right click, route to this track only, side chain to this track only. But we're not going to be clicking those because this is about making a bus right now. So you should make a bus for all your instruments. Now, if you click this, if you hold down Control and you click it, then it will route all of them to only this track automatically. If you hold Shift and left click, you can see it side chains. So the info goes, but there's no volume. Now, if I hold Control and click it again, then it's going to be 100% volume. And you can see that in the top corner, the top left, right underneath my name. So if we look here, we got that, and that. Because there are times when you want to compress all of the instruments. And actually, I routed them to the wrong one because that's my voice. So that's an example of what I mean. So I should color my voice differently. Right? Like some bright color that stands out like that. Type my voice. Wow. Can't type today. So now that one is more obvious. So I'm going to take these. All three of them are routed to this track now. And I would put like bell bus. Change the color of it to probably the same color that they are, because it will guide your eye. Do the same thing with these right here. Change this to orchestra bus. Make them the same color. And the same thing would follow logically for the drums. This is not a hard, fast rule that these should be the same color, because there's a lot of times where I make them a different color on purpose. Normally I use this teal kind of color for, or I guess maybe it's cerulean. It looks cerulean to me. But I use that to signify delay. Normally reverb is dark blue. So reverb. Copy. Second reverb would be some different one. Like this is going to be a far one. This one's going to be a close one. If I add a third one, it's going to be in the middle. Drum bus, orchestra bus, bell bus. Now why? Why do you need a bus? Because you do things to the individual instruments, but then you consider them in mass as a unit. So you may compress the entire bus, like the mix bus, if one of them is, say, doing something that's like too much. Like if you lower these faders like this, but you can't quite get it to the way you want it to sound, and you want to equalize everything so it sounds correct. That's what's meant by adding glue. And it's really useful when you do multi-band compression, and Maximus is like awesome for that. Same thing with these, with all of them, because you might want to compress the drum bus, and you also might want to EQ it. That's what I do a lot. And if you want to hear if there are resonances in the reverb, which is another thing, because you could have mud and not know where it's coming from. It could come from the reverb. Once you've added one here, it's going to be at 100%. But if you just add every track individually, which you could do, like you go here, and along the way, I would add the amount that I want. So you wouldn't see everything at 100%, because I want some things to be closer. So like if this is the closest instrument, it's going to have less reverb. This one might have something like this. This one might have more. This one might be like in the middle, somewhere around the same thing as that one. And then I'll turn this down because maybe there's too much reverb in general. I'll compress the reverb and EQ it for resonances. But if I just add every track like this, then when I turn these tracks off, the reverb is going to disappear too because there's no more sound being generated. But if I separate the dry signal so that it's going here, and the reverb signal is going here, then when I turn off this, and I say these turned on, I can turn that off and hear the reverb by itself. So that's why you would do this, because then it's easier to detect resonances, because it's harder to hear if there's resonances in the reverb while the dry sound is playing too. And you can look at it and compress it basically. Or Fruity Limiter and Maximus have visual displays that are actually very good, especially if you look in the manual. So those are some things to consider. Let me see, did I write anything else? Nope, that's basically it. And it saves a lot of time to learn the shortcuts like these, especially keyboard shortcuts and middle clicking. If you have an actual mouse and you click in the middle. Another useful tidbit is what happens when you scroll in a certain place. So if you are just here and you scroll, it goes up and down. But let's say if you hold control here and you scroll, it zooms in. So let's say you're zoomed in, you go up here onto the scroll bar and you scroll and it goes right and left. If you scroll with the scroll wheel while you're here, it zooms in or out. So these are things to know. If you hold down Alt and you scroll, it zooms vertically. Control zooms horizontally, as I said. But you can zoom horizontally by going to like where the measures are written in the playlist, like where they're signified, the 1, 2, 3, 4, those are bars. If you scroll there, it zooms. And so the goal of this video was to just save you time while you're setting up a project, because it's important to think about what you're going to do later in that project. And you want to start thinking about that from the beginning. You know, you're like, all right, if I picked all these sounds, then when I come back here, if I don't work on this project for a while because I get hindered by like something else, then it's going to be easier to pick up where I left off because things are so streamlined. And I just have basically left myself visual cues. I'm like, yo, I did all this, and that's all pink, and then it's pink here, and then this is like cerulean, and then that is too, and these are red, so they all just go together. This is something special, that's why it's a unique color that nothing else is. These are reverb because that's my thing. That's what would go there. And probably something like this would be delay. Some light blue color or light green like that. because I think of like Fruity Delay 3. Yeah. And you would be considering all these things at the beginning, you know, so you don't have to think about them later. You don't have to figure out like, oh, I left off. Also, another useful thing is to, because I just thought about it, you can go to the Fruity Notebook, go to more plugins. When you have a lot, it takes a while to load the list. I have like all of Complete Control 13 Collector's Edition is like ridiculous, and the Isotope stuff. If you type in notes, Fruity Notebooks come in. So you can put it on the master bus. You can automate it so that it will change words in case you want to make a video or something like that. You can write notes about what you're going to do to the track. I do this by hand a lot of the time, or I just remember, because you don't have to use a notebook. What I'll do sometimes is I'll do something like this, right? Let's say I know I need to EQ something, so I leave an EQ open. So when I open it, I'm like, oh, okay, I need the EQ. And then I'll highlight this section. And it will only play this when I press play. So I know I need to EQ that section. And I'll close this, and I'll have this just by itself. These are little things that make you pick up where you left off. And obviously you see that this is the master bus. So if I open this and I see this, I'm like, oh, okay, the last thing I was going to do was to EQ the master bus. It's about helping yourself to stay in a continual workflow that is efficient. And it's going to save you a lot of time in every single project when you decide to do this. Because you can even make this, you can save it as a template. You can save it as a project, right? Save or save as. It'll ask you, if you save a new version and you've already named something, it's going to give it the same name and put like a number 2. So if I name this Untitled, and then I hit save new version after I saved it as Untitled, it will save it as Untitled 2. But I'm not going to do that. You can, you can play around with that yourself. It is useful at some points when you want to keep the original project, but see if you can improve on it because you learned something new. This is something that I've done over time, and it has been fruitful for me. So templates, things like that. If you go here, there's a lot of templates they offer. The default for me is empty because then FL Studio loads the fastest. This one is called Live Stream that I'm affecting right now. Master template is for mastering. Neutron is something different that I kind of never really used. And like standard beginning and all of these are just things for a specific purpose, kind of like that. Like standard beginning has a whole bunch of stuff like this instantiated already. Like the synthesizers that I use the most, they would just load and they will already be here. And I think there's reverb too, so I don't have to add all of those things, because obviously I took this whole video to do organization, and you may not want to do that every time. But if you take the standpoint that each song is different and you don't know what you're going to do yet, and you're just trying to start something, maybe you have a drum idea, you just want to like record it, then that's when you do something like this. Or you have an empty template, like the master template is empty. It just has a bunch of mid side channels and parametric EQs and things. And there's a section like this that is docked to the right, so that it is the entire track summed, the side and the mono put back together. Now the next thing is going to be CPU usage. As you can see, the CPU meter up here, and from what I understand, there's something special about the way that it calculates, but I'm not going to get into that because I forgot exactly what it is versus how you would think of like regular CPU usage. It was something really strange. This is like image line is very unique with the way they think about things, and the CPU meter is no exception. But I cannot explain it to you because I didn't fully understand it myself. And I only found one video that ever spoke about it. But if I watch that video again, then maybe I'll talk about it in the future. It was interesting. So basically, if you have this hit 100%, it's going to cause artifacts in the audio. And there is such a thing as a safe buffer overload, so that the computer won't crash or whatever happens, like it'll freeze, I guess. And it will allow it to overload in such a way that it won't do that. But the place where you control those things is going to be in project general settings. So we go over these. This is where you have MIDI, right? So if you have a keyboard or some other MIDI device, you connect it here and then you enable it here. My keyboard is turned off, so it's not actually populating. Then you got audio. This is the first one. So buffer length is the amount of time, basically, when the computer, I think, when it's refreshing to check real time for how the audio is like happening. So let's say this is like 47 milliseconds, right? And the easiest way to understand this, the way I do, is when you have a shorter buffer time, the computer is more aware of changes at a faster pace. So if I have this buffer time, maximum you can have, it's going to take a longer time before the computer discerns that I made some type of external change. But the most obvious one is when you press a keyboard. And when there's a shorter time, the computer is checking more often. And that means that it is going to have to use more CPU for that purpose. Because it's like having to think over and over again. So you'll notice, if you look here, I don't know if this is going to do one of those buffer overloads I was talking about, but if you switch the buffer length to be a lot shorter, 56, and my battery is running low, that's funny. So if I close that, then this will start to be higher in CPU usage. If I go back to it, and I switch it back to a longer buffer time, you'll notice that it's not going to go higher quite as frequently. And to be honest with you, it's behaving now because it went way higher than that before. It went to like 50 and 60 and it stayed there. But that's one way if your project is overloading with CPU usage. Here, and it is in audio settings, and increase the buffer length, and then you should have more CPU power. The next way is when you go to project, time-based, PPC. And I honestly forgot what this stands for, but I can explain it to you. Basically, when you zoom in, there is a certain amount that you can zoom in. And you can see the fidelity of a waveform. So I don't know. Hold on. Let's go to packs, drums, kicks. It did not add it because that's an instrument track. So if I zoom in, I can see a certain amount of the waveform, but I can't see the full waveform. What PPC does is it increases the amount that you're able to zoom in and get more fidelity out of what you see. And the higher you go, the more it's going to be able to zoom. But look at how the CPU jumped. So you might consider that you don't need to zoom in this much. See how high it goes? If you reduce it, it warns you that there's no undo, but like that's fine. I've never heard a real significant change in that. It's just an amount of zoom that you're going to see. Cool, so it's live. Hello everyone, Ron again. And in this video, we're going to continue from where I was at in the last video. Now, what I was doing and what I have been doing for the past few videos is just giving project tips about setting up in FL Studio. Different simple things that you can do at the beginning of a project to like make your workflow better. So I was talking about macros, but given what happened, I have a few more. So one of them is to actually charge your computer. During the last live stream, I was like, well, my computer is dying. The notification came up on the screen and I dismissed it, and then it died during the live stream, so I wasn't able to finish. Now that wound up working out for me creatively while I was designing the thumbnail, but it wasn't intended. It was just kind of funny. So charge your computer, right? Make sure it doesn't die in the middle of the project. And there are some other ones that I was considering too that I wasn't gonna mention, but I guess now I will. I use my cell phone, at least I have been for these few videos. Normally I use a tablet, but it's good to use some device. Like I explained, that here you have Fruity Notebook too, but I don't like to type because, I feel like it's easier to write sometimes or to just swipe something into a phone. So I've been using my cell phone, and it has like the S Pen. It's an Android Galaxy Note 9. So I have it on Do Not Disturb so people can't call me and intrude upon this time. And hopefully nobody just walks in the room. That's another thing you should do. Tell people you're working on something. But I didn't do that. My family scattered through the house doing various things. So, God is with us. And so that is like 2 tips in one. Use a device to keep track of your ideas rather than just Fruity Notebook. Like, you should understand that you have options, right? It's a good thing to know all the stuff that's at your disposal, which is something that we'll get into later. The other thing, in this case, that I decided to talk about is to like pray for inspiration, because I pray a lot. I pray every time I'm doing a video right beforehand that I can do it correctly and effectively in the name of Jesus. So you might have heard from watching the other videos, me reading Psalm 23, and I try to do what the Bible says, so no shame. So those are the extra tips. And I covered a lot of the stuff that I wanted to say, but there is about maybe half of it that I had written already that I didn't do, so we're going to get into that. So I watched the live stream, the end of it, when I was listing it again, because they become unlisted automatically. And where I was at was, I said if you hit Control E, hold down Control, press E, on the mixer tracks, it will place an Edison there. And I was talking about macros and how they save you CPU. So in tools, you have macros, you have all these things, right? And the one that I was going to demonstrate was, where is it? Okay, remove all Edison instances. Now, because Edison is something that is in the RAM, it is always active. RAM is like short-term memory, right? So you could consider that to be the things the computer is thinking right now. And so that's going to increase the usage of CPU, especially because it has to store something there. And you could save it and it will be part of the hard drive later, like the permanent memory, which would be like long-term memory for us. So if you have all these instances because you've been recording, like say if I was recording here and I put another Edison and then I wanted it to do multiple tracks and I want them on different channels and stuff like that, background vocals, then they're going to take up extra CPU because they're acting on the RAM. So a macro example is remove all Edisons. And I ask you, are you sure you want to remove them? There's no undo. And like, that's fine because, I mean, usually it's not going to be something that's like a permanent change. In my experience, like you're going to do that and then you're going to press this button right here and you're going to drop it to the playlist. So it's not going to matter. But yes, you see it disappears. I go back to track 10. There's no Edison there. That'll take all of them out all at once. Another one that I use a lot is, well, I would if I was putting audio clips on the playlist. Like let's say, zoom in here, I put audio all around. And then I'm like, yeah, I have a lot of it. Like let's pretend, you see I have this attack kick, but it's not actually anywhere on the playlist. So I guess we don't have to pretend. So this macro is going to remove it because it's not being used. See how it disappears? Oh, hold on. That means it, okay, no, it is being used. So if I delete it, and I'm like, yeah, I don't like that, because I did use that in the last video. I was wondering why I didn't see it, but, you know, slow moments. Ha. Anyway, so if I delete it, and I'm like, nah, that sounds crazy. It's ugly, disgusting, I hate it. And, nah, I wouldn't actually say all that. You know, you gotta appreciate what you're creating. But purge unused audio clips, they're taking up RAM too. And you don't need them here if they're not being used. So, see, now it disappears. There's still an audio group, but there's no unused audio. So that's going to save you RAM. And this is what the macros are intended to do. The one I probably use the most is, where is it? Switch Smart Disable for all plugins. So what it does is it turns off the plugins that are not doing anything, but they're instantiated. And it'll save you CPU. Now I have a bunch of stuff loaded that's not really going to inflate my CPU because there is the video, which you can see me here, and that's taking up a portion of it, so I cannot dedicate all of it to FL Studio the way I might if I was not live streaming. But with that being said, you know, this is still something to be considered, because if you're just sitting there and you're thinking about something, working on something particular, you may have some of those that are like heavy hitters, and they really make the RAM and the CPU usage spike. Anything that is editing in real time, like think about something like maybe a lot of plugins from Isotope can potentially do it. Like Music Rebalance is one that is heavy, and I guess I have some of them here I can show you. Right, a lot of the things from RX 7 or 8, if they do something complicated, they can consume a lot of RAM and a lot of CPU. So you think of something like that, like Music Rebalance. I don't think it's actually here. I know it's in Ozone, and you see here Ozone 9. Ozone 9 is an example because it has to do a lot of powerful processing to actually do all the stuff that it's doing. It uses algorithms. So if you use the Ozone 9 maximizer, for example, it is using an algorithm that's pre-programmed to do a certain thing. Versus if you use something like Maximus, then you sort of create that yourself. And that's what I like about it. So you can see I can put a Maximus here, and it's really not doing much of anything. Now Maximus can cause the same thing to happen because it has this look ahead delay time. So if you increase that, it's going to make it so that the actual sound is delayed, and Maximus can look ahead to try to prevent clipping and stuff of that nature. And if you turn it off, apparently it won't sound as good. That's what it says in the manual. And you know, and I've seen that in videos too. So that makes sense. You know, you would allow CPU to be boosted for that reason, because maybe you're mastering, or maybe you have something that's like drums and you want to make it sound cohesive, because that's what glue means in compression. It means everything sounds like it is balanced and in the same place, rather than like you have a kick drum that sounds like it is right in front of you, and you have cymbals that sound like they're next door. You know, if they were in front of you too, like they're a house away and the kick drum is like right in your front yard, that'd be crazy. The cymbals are across the street. You'd be like, how is this drum set even being played? Like what? But anyway, so those are macros. Those are the things that they help you to save CPU, and they do like wide parameter sweeps, I guess you call it. Maybe that doesn't sound right, but they affect things in mass, and they do it simply with just one click. That's kind of what you want. What else do I have written here? I already said use your cell phone. I'm using my cell phone to keep track of what I want to say. Okay. So another thing that's going to save you CPU usage is, let's go here. pretty parametric EQ. Now you can see, it seems to me at least, that this started to spike just ever so slightly when I open this up. Because the more things you have on the interface, the more CPU they're going to use. And this is just something I've noticed. People don't usually talk about it. But when I open up the mixer track, see it starts hitting the 20s. Because it's doing all this graphical processing too. And so there's going to be more CPU that's used. The more video data or like graphical interface information that's being created that the computer has to do all at once. So that's something to consider as well. A lot of times I will have a project, like there was this one beat I was making, I had the whole master bus consumed because I was basically using Ozone 9, but I was using it in such a way I was using each module separately. So I'm like, you know, Ozone Dynamic EQ, Ozone EQ, Dynamics, which is the compressor. The maximizer's at the end. It's over here. Where is it? It's FX Analyzer. I use Span a lot. Sometimes I use Insight because they show you how loud something is and you're going for commercial volume. Usually LUFS, because a lot of the time you're mastering for a streaming service and you don't want it to clip when it gets to Spotify or like Apple Music and sound crazy, because there's already enough going on when it is switched to a lossy codec like MP3. So you're thinking about all that stuff down the road, and you got like FX Master in here. It has Ozone 8, you know? So you're considering all these things, and these plugins are each doing stuff in real time because the audio is playing. And it's not like RX. Like if you have the standalone RX, it'll make the change and then stop processing and just leave it that way, and you can go back. But FL Studio and DAWs tend to be in real time. So that's something to be considered. And I would load this project, and I actually started redoing it, that beat. And now the CPU is around here, but I would turn it on, and it uses like heavy hitters from Native Instruments too, because if you look here, it's not just these things that are processing in real time that use a lot of CPU. If I go to generators and I go down, you have contact, complete control, because it's connecting to the piano, I suppose. Like I have the complete control keyboard and everything is mapped, and I like that. But it uses a lot of CPU if you use a bigger sample library like orchestral stuff, because you got to understand that they have like articulations. So like you have legato, which is something smooth, is played smoothly and it transitions in a smooth fashion. And you have staccato, which is like bump, 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 bump. Staccatissimo, which is even shorter. You got stuff like mercato and a whole bunch of different articulations. So when they're recording these, they have professional players being recorded playing each note. And these things load with all these notes. So they take up a lot of the, I can't remember what it's called. It's escaping me. That would be, I think, RAM. Yeah. So it will use like, say, it'll go from 1542. Yeah, that is RAM. Which is 1,000 megabytes is 1 gigabyte. So that's using 1 gig of RAM. The computer has 16. So this is just doing 1 gig of RAM by itself. Now I could go to 16 without the CPU topping out, but it's not always the case that that's going to happen, because there's something that's so like crazy and powerful, and it's doing this thing from this. So it's got to switch between the massive amount of samples. That's why Native Instruments, when you buy their stuff, there is so much data that you have to download, because they have samples of every note a lot of the time. So that's to be considered when you're doing all these things. And I would find myself opening this project and it immediately goes to like 98%. And so if I open the mixer bus, it will start to just hit 100 and it would become red. And then there would be artifacts when I'm listening to it. So I had to close this, close everything else, close tonal balance control, and I would just have to play it like that. So I took all the plugins off and resolved myself to use more than one project while doing this. I basically started over because I was like, this isn't going to work. How am I going to add more to it? I can't write anymore. It's not even finished and it's doing all that. But that's why, like I said previously in the reverb video, you should consider doing some things that you do to the project later on. And maybe just set it up at first. So that's for me too. And that is a big consideration to understand how your plugins work. Toward which, that is one of the other things I would suggest. Learn how the plugins work. So that's what I was saying earlier that we're going to come back to. Explore FL Studio and all the other things that you may like download, like third-party plugins. You have help here. Go read the instruction manual, because when you're trying to create something, you're going to make something faster based on understanding how the plugin works, rather than to sit here and try to figure out what's going on. Like, you could take spare time and have days for just sound design, which is something that I do. I have a project that is intended just for sound design, and I make the sounds and audition them and see if I like them. And then I save them as presets, and you can see them all over here. They go from the top here to like all the way down here, and they all sound different. The same thing is true with mini synth. And there I have a list of favorites, because you can create that in Flex, where I've gone through and just checked, like, these are the sounds I like that I'll probably use more often. So those are things to be considered. In your downtime, when you don't feel like creating music, make sounds. See if there are sounds in there that you like, that sound good, or learn more about the craft, because then you'll produce a better output in the sense of a total package more quickly. If you're watching something like this and it's getting you to think about what you're going to do down the road in your project, now you have a better workflow. So the next project you do, if you apply the wisdom that you learned from someone else who has been there and has faced the battle and overcome it, then you're going to do a lot better for yourself without having to face the same battle. So is there anything else? Oh yeah, there's one more. Along the same vein, go to the mixer tracks, go to more plugins. Wait for this to load, because if you have a lot, it takes a lot to scan all of them. See, it's loading at the bottom. And go here and check the plugins that are not just normally listed. A simple way to do that is to just type the word Fruity. Right? Or you could look at the demo projects. That's what I did. Because you have something like, where is it? Fruity Free Filter, which you wouldn't know is there unless you go searching. And especially, there's a bunch of filters. Fruity Free Filter, Fruity Filter. But if you go to the filter section, it's got the love filter. And I guess a lot of the time you're going to use parametric EQ too. EQO is cool. When you have reverb, you got Fruity Reverb 2, Fruity Convolver, but you can see it should be down here. Fruity Reverb, the first one, Fruity Reverb 2. And they have their uses and their applications. Examples are that Fruity Convolver, I think it works as like a linear phase EQ that you can manipulate. ImageLine has videos that talk about it in their effects videos, where they're covering all the different effects in FL Studio. You should check those out. And so you can use those things in different situations. Like, if I just want to, let's say I just want to create a high pass filter, then I could go here, go to presets. Sure, you could do that like this. Right? Where this is just a high pass filter, or even like a band pass filter. But this graphical interface is going to use more than just using like Fruity Filter. So I have presets here that I made. This is just a high pass filter. and I just turn this. There's no graphical interface at all. It takes off the low end, and it has resonance. Now on the other one, you could create resonance, but then you would have to manipulate the bands individually. Because if you were doing that, that would look like this. You know, you would turn all of these off. Right, you would switch this one to being high pass, put it where you want it, and create the resonance. Then you have to switch this one to being peaking. And that's what resonance would look like. That's what it does. When you have resonance, it has a small EQ boost. So you could do that manually, but look how much longer it took compared to just doing this. Especially because I made a preset. You just increase the resonance. That's the same type of thing. So this is why you should understand the different plugins that are in the program. You should read the manual and see if things do what you think they do, because they don't always. An example is in Citrus, you go to effects, you would think there's a send track here. So it's sending this chorus and it's separating the effect from the dry effect, or, you know, and it's adding the dry effect to the reverb. That's what you would think is happening, but that's not what's happening. You know, when I was reading it, I didn't understand exactly what was happening, but I didn't really give it too much attention because it wasn't affecting me. I was like, in that regard, I could either not use chorus, I could make a separate track that's a bus. I could apply Fruity Chorus, you know, because it's right here. And it's probably going to give me more control. Or I could use it and decrease the spread if that's what I'm after, because I don't want the sound to be too wide and be masking other ones. So yeah, those are the things to think about. And that is all I had for this video. Yeah, so that's cool. And if you made it to the end, or even if you tuned in live especially, then I thank you for watching. And as always, have an awesome day. Peace.